While Metaphor Refantazio's combat is the direct offspring of Persona, or maybe ECMT since it has press turn, I personally see far more in common with Fire Emblem Three Houses, which is ironically a game that has much of the DNA of Persona, and thus the Ouroboros is complete. The first similarity is scale. Metaphor is a game about the world it takes place in, and fighting to change it into a better one. As such, the story deals with much grander themes like political movements, the relations between races, and the history and lore of the world itself. Whereas Persona is often a story about characters, and how they overcome the insurmountable challenges of the real world by diving into fantasy. They are much more personal stories, hence the name of the franchise. Three Houses is a game focused entirely on the machinations of the world, how the three factions interact with each other, the disdain that some groups hold for others, and if you pick the Golden Deer, trying to achieve a world based on unity, free from discrimination. Basically, Metaphor and Fire Emblem deal with characters at the upper echelons of the world, and almost every chapter has some significant effect on a faction and the world at large. It's a much grander scale that feels more epic. On the other hand, Persona is about the people that society pays no mind to, the ones on the bottom, and the game is about them rising both in power and social status, until they culminate in defeating a nearly invincible enemy. This is actually the core reason why I think Persona has an excellent story, not just by JRPG standards, but in general, because the characters are so relatable, which is almost impossible to achieve in a fantasy setting. Aside from the topics, Metaphor is much more akin to Three Houses in its role-playing elements. By that I mean the way you build your characters for combat. The archetype system may seem like it gives you less options than Persona's fusing mechanic, but this couldn't be further from the truth. Because in Persona, the fusions are essentially random. Hold your horses, I know they're not actually, but with just how vast the fusion chart is, and how it's completely unpredictable what you'll end up with, it essentially is. Meanwhile, Metaphor lets you individually craft your archetype from all 13 trees, and lets you mix and match your moves through its job system. It requires much more optimization and planning on the player's part, and allows you to character build. What's more is that every single party member is fully customizable, unlike Persona where only the protagonist has a non-linear upgrade path. Three Houses offers that same amount of freedom. You can make any of the units into any class in the game, no matter how stupid it looks to make Raphael a white mage. The game will allow you to do so. While Three Houses doesn't have a job system to match Metaphors, so you can't mix and match different moves, it still offers a much wider range of choice than Persona, so in terms of role-playing, these two have much more in common than Persona. Next and most obvious is tone. Persona is maybe the most vibrant franchise in existence, exuding a sense of style in almost every aesthetic choice imaginable. From music to UI to character design, Persona lives and dies by the rule of cool, whilst always maintaining a high beat energy. While Metaphor and Three Houses go in a decidedly different direction. These games are much more grand and traditionally artistic. The characters exude importance rather than style, and the enemies are more inspired by the work of a master painter, rather than the eclectic subconscious ideas of a punk aesthetic. I think it says a lot about how, unlike SMT and Persona, Metaphor has an almost entirely original bestiary, with them being more undecipherable than the demons and shadows that the studio is known for. While Fire Emblem has few fantasy elements and is focused more on human versus human combat, when the fantastical elements do present themselves, they also come across as strange amalgamations with a higher idea behind their design. I mean, why do the demonic beasts wear masks? This is clearly an artistic decision rather than a practical one, and it creates a mystery to the monster, something for the player to unravel and dissect the meaning behind. Meanwhile, Persona is like, here's a snowman in a hat, hee-haw! We can draw a direct parallel to the humans in Metaphor Refantazio, odd and jumbled monsters whose very name establishes to the player that there's something much deeper going on here, that the perverse design of the abominations is hiding something much more tragic. Finally, there's the relationship your protagonist has with your party members. Persona is a game where friendship is the central theme. You build connections with your friends, and you both become stronger because of it, and the unity you have as a group creates an unbreakable bond. Now, the same can be said of Metaphor and Three Houses, but I would argue that these relationships aren't about friendship, but respecting one another. Your party members are your subordinates, and you're their leader. You have to show them kindness by helping them through their problems. Your character often gains nothing by helping your party members, only you the player by getting gameplay bonuses. Whereas Persona is all about making deals with your confidants in a symbiotic relationship that benefits both of you. Hence why in Persona 5, every social link starts with a text about having made a vow with someone. This makes Will and Byleth feel like much more selfless characters than a Persona protagonist. But again, the Persona character feels much more relatable. However, make no mistake, out of all three protagonists, Will is the best. And if you'd like to know why, click the video on screen now. I'll be back in 2 days, and in the meantime, consider subscribing.